And I also wanted to give one additional answer, which was actually to the question of evil spirits and also the question of judgment and negative influences. The question about being judgmental and being subject to negative influences, I thought of a cycle that I had to go through also. You know, the word empath was not a big word when I was growing up, but probably that's what I am. You know, I've always been able to just feel and see what's going on around me a lot. And as I became a spiritual person, I became very aware of the fact of how sensitive I was. And my self-definition became very much about how sensitive I was. You know, I could feel vibrations and I didn't want to be there and I did want to be here, and I just constantly. And I walked around the world kind of like on ballet shoes because I was so sensitive, like this. I'm doing a class with a friend of mine, and he's about 6'3", great big man. Kirtanist, it was Raghu, of course. Big energy, built like Isha Das, except a lot more of him, you know, just really big and strong. So we're doing a class on affirmations, and we didn't really plan it that much, but it was his turn to do the affirmation. And I don't know, it was one of Master's affirmations. We're sitting right next to each other. He starts affirming, and this is how I remember it. I am big, I am strong, I am big, I am strong. And we're all supposed to say, I am big, I am strong. And inwardly I'm saying, I'm tiny, I'm sensitive. I'm tiny, I'm sensitive. And right in the middle of that, I thought, why do I keep affirming that the more spiritual I get, the weaker I get? If I were really, if God was really with me, I would be more powerful than any force in the universe. And all of a sudden, just in that moment, I kind of got into his aura, and I started saying, I am big, I am strong. And trust me, it took longer than that. But I realized I had made a self-definition out of being vulnerable. But I had twisted it, that the reason I was vulnerable was because I was so spiritual and I was so sensitive and the world was so gross and it was so hard for me to take, which was also true. But the power of God is within me, and why should I allow those forces to take my sense of the divine away from me? That's the answer to evil spirits. That's the answer to all of this. And we have to pick it up from the right end. I hope that's helpful. Now, and I still am really sensitive, and I don't like to go to places I don't like. I've walked out of many a store because the music was so terrible. I was crouched in this health food store trying to buy laundry soap, and I could not choose among the laundry soap that was on the bottom shelf. And I finally realized that there was a loudspeaker above me that was pounding on my head with this just rhythm that was breaking my brain. And so I did not buy laundry soap, I just left. Because it is true. The forces are true. Okay, there's a few questions. This one says, I want to understand why someone who feels a powerful connection to the spiritual path can then leave it. Is it karma or is it going backward? Okay, when we were first beginning, my collective tribe, to be responsible for helping teach others and bring them to the path and so on, Swami brought us together and he said, only some people have lifelong spiritual karma. He said the majority of people have some karma that will either express in a peripheral way for their whole lives or will flame up intensely, but the fuel will burn out. They have that much karma to do it for a while. It's completely powerful and sincere, but then that energy goes and they go off and do something else. Is it in their best interest to have done that? Well, from a divine perspective, perhaps not. Is it necessary? It's the way the tide is going to come in for them. And he wanted us to understand it's not your fault. It's not that you failed them. It's that that's just the way the karma is running. And karma doesn't run forward and backward. Because sometimes you have to, this is one of the fundamental AA propositions, which is true. You have to hit bottom before you'll start up again. So sometimes, and then this comes back because I've been in this long enough, you know. I remember this man, young man, very promising spiritual energy, became enamored of this woman that he met in the community who had very little spiritual karma but was there at the moment. Swami asked several of us who were friends with this man to suggest to him that this was not a good alliance for him, but he thought it was, so he married her. They left. He had a long career, raised 5 children, had all these grandchildren. Like 30 years later, he comes back and stands in front of me. I said, I recognize you. Who are you? He told me his name. Then he, very sadly told me what had happened. And, it wasn't a bad life. He'd had a successful career. He had children. He had all these things that people wanted. But he remembered what he'd had before and what he'd put aside. So was it a bad thing that he did it, or did he learn? And does he now know? It's like we have all the time in the world to get this right. We think that a mistake is the end of it. It isn't. It's an experience. I mean, we have these people who commit suicide and don't die, or commit suicide and then have learned the lesson. Its issue is whether you learn, whether you are learning. And everything that happens is necessary, else you wouldn't do it. God wouldn't make you do it unless it was necessary. I'm going to try to do what I'm calling a lightning round. Is praying for people who have died helpful? Of course it is, because they're still out there. They haven't ceased to exist. If you love them enough to pray for them, it's their good karma to have you pray for them. Our relations, the relations that are deep, that are not just superficial or circumstantial, last forever. We keep coming back and meeting the same people. However, you want to pray in a way that's helpful. And this was a story near our community in Italy is outside of Assisi, and it's on this rural road on the way to some little town there. And apparently at some point, a young man, youngish man in his 20s, had a fatal motorcycle accident on that road. And the mother built a little shrine where he died, and there were always fresh flowers on that shrine. And now it had been 2 or 3 years since he died, and every day there were fresh flowers. Most people thought, oh, what beautiful love, what devotion. Swami goes by, and somebody explained to him what that was. He said, oh, that poor man. He said he's just going to have to repudiate his mother because he's gone. He's not her son anymore. It was his time to leave, and he's on to another adventure. And with grief, she's trying to hold him back. And because he was her son, and because her connection, her determination is strong, that's going to be an anchor on his life. Because that identification is over. So in the name of loving him, she's actually binding him to something that is no longer true. And so that's why he used the word, he's going to have to repudiate her in order to get free of that. Let's just make it like your child decides he gets a scholarship to study art in Paris. And so now your child is thousands of miles away from you. You call every day, oh, my daughter, I miss you so much. My son, where are you? Your son's going to start blocking your calls. Because he's on to a new adventure, and you're trying to insist that my grief is more important than your life. Is this love? Who am I serving? And so the same laws apply all the way up to the most subtle worlds. So yes, you can say, I hope you're having a great time. We're sorry that you're not here, but we're so happy that you're on to the next adventures. I hope everything is going well for you. Go, boy, go. And then you'll be an asset. So that's what you want to pray in such a way that you're in relationship to expansion, not to contraction. What to speak of what it does to you? If your reason for continuing to pray is trying to hold yourself also into a reality that isn't there. This one woman, she'd had a very generous father who'd worked extremely hard to raise the family, and then he died. And 2 years later, she's still weeping and crying. I said, for heaven's sakes, give the man a break. He spent his whole life taking care of you. You're a grown-up now. Let him go on. Of course, he knows you love him. But be grateful. Don't be so selfish that you want him to just forever take care of you. So, yeah, your prayers reach them, but you want them to reach in the right way if you're going to be helpful. It says, while we're here, can we help those who do not believe in God? Well, believe in God is a phrase that doesn't really mean that much inherently. Some people who are atheistic are actually more spiritually attuned than some people who say they're God-loving. We're very enamored of intellectual concepts, and God reads the heart. So if you are demonstrably, if you have an uplifting vibration of joy and love, last night I was talking about the 8 manifestations, if you exemplify spiritual qualities, you will inspire people to want to be close to you, which in and of themselves itself will change their vibration, and you will give people the inspiration of what they might become. And you can call it the great white elephant, you can call it anything you want. It doesn't matter. It's the actual, it's not what you name it. It's what you actually are. So of course you can be helpful. And what causes people to suddenly believe in God? Something comes into you that is not intellectual, is not just words, is what I mean by that. You just suddenly perceive a reality, a potential for something. Swami talks about a young man he met who insisted that he was an atheist. And then they got into the subject of love. And the man, deeply and profoundly believed in love. And Swami said, you call yourself an atheist? Where do you think love comes from? What do you think it is? So forget what people say. It doesn't make the slightest difference what they say. Hey, and forget what you're saying. A lot of times there's nothing you can say. I was in one particular death situation, which was pretty dramatic. The man had been on life support. At 3 p.m. on Tuesday, they were going to take him off life support. And the wife called me to come. The man had never been spiritual. The man, when he found out there was no sex in heaven, he decided he really wasn't interested in our teaching. His concept of heaven was, it had to include sexuality, period. It was the beginning and the end of his interest in our path. The other one like that, this was another one of my favorites. I was in Seattle, and these 2 women came. I believe they were Hungarian, which just for some reason seemed to matter at the time. Hungarian sisters, they were very glamorous. And they became completely infatuated just by me, by my personality. And so because I was presenting these teachings, they were interested in the teachings. They bought Yogananda's book, Whispers from Eternity, which has these wonderful prayers, prayers to God about various things. And they were coming to everything I was doing. At that time, I would spend 2 or 3 weeks in that city and give a whole lot of programs. So about a week into it, they're coming to everything. They're sitting in the front row. They're just so enthusiastic. They call me about 7 a.m, and it's urgent that they come over and talk to me. So the 2 sisters show up, and they've got Whispers from Eternity in their hand. They've opened it to one of the prayers. I don't know which one it was, but they've marked it with a pen, and it says, "Save me from sex temptation." And they said, "Is this what you're teaching?" And they were just horrified, and I never saw them again. So you can take people a certain distance, and then they're going to hit what they're going to hit. But I was answering a different question. So at 3 p.m, this man's going to die. And he had been unconscious. I come in at 2:30, he's wide awake. Whoa, wide awake. But he's got all this intubation, and he can't speak. But he's there, he knows perfectly well, and he was absolutely calm. This man was more of a yogi than many yogis that I know. He had power, whatever he called it, he had power. But he was so calm and just so surrendered to it, and he wanted to die too. His body was ruined. There was nothing he was going to be able to do. And so I said, so the first thing they do before they take the tube out is they sedate him so that he'll be unconscious when they do it. I said to a few of the medical people, he's not afraid. Maybe we don't have to sedate him. But the doctors and the nurses needed to sedate him. They couldn't deal with it. So then I realized nobody in this room is going to hear anything I have to say. The only thing I can do is just be here with the vibrations of the masters, I hope. And it was a very good lesson for me. There's a quote from St. Francis, I may have mentioned it, that I keep on my wall. From Francis, he says, "Preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words." So, let's see what else. How do you let go of regret? I asked Swami once about reincarnation. I actually asked him a different question, but he answered better than my question. My question was, will I be as stupid when I'm 20 again as I was this time? Which is like, how much will stay with me and how much am I just going to lose in the tumultuousness of a new body? He didn't answer that question. Probably thought the answer would be too depressing. He said, what causes you to reincarnate? This is very important. What causes reincarnation is two elements within you. That you long for something you never got, or you deeply regret something you think you did wrong, and you want a chance to fix it. That's why we come back over and over and over again. Master added one further explanation. He said, we keep reincarnating because material life almost works. If it was a pure catastrophe, we would repudiate it, but it almost works. If I had just married his brother instead of him, it would have been a lot better. If only we hadn't had that child who was such a lemon and caused us so much difficulty. If only I hadn't gone into banking, but had just followed my heart and been an artist. If only I hadn't been such an idiot and was an artist and had been a banker. So we just make these tiny adjustments, and then we try again until it assumes what Yogananda said is not tragedy. Tragedy is absorbing. It assumes anguishing monotony. That was his brilliant wordsmithing. The anguishing monotony of it is what really gets us. Just really, here we are again. I can't believe it. Master said that's why babies cry. The baby has not started its incarnation until it breathes in. And when you die, you breathe out. Perfect balance. And if you're astrologically interested in astrology, you have someone in the room who notes the exact time the baby takes its first breath, because that's when the incarnation actually starts. Okay. But Master said the baby breathes in because at that point, it realizes, oh God, here I am again. And most babies begin to scream at that point. I can't believe I'm here again. But what brings us back is that there was something that we thought would make us happy that we didn't get, so we're coming here to try to get it. So we can, and on a soul level, so we can find out just how much happiness it will give us, which may be quite a lot, because there's a great many joyous things in this world. So Swami also said, we learn from being disappointed, from having our desires thwarted, but we learn more from having them fulfilled. Isn't that interesting? Because as long as it's not fulfilled, you believe that I would be happier if I could get this. And that very thought keeps us from recognizing the bliss that already exists. Because we have conditioned our own thinking, so we keep coming back to have it. Regret is exactly the same. I did something stupid, I hurt these people, everything is wrong, and I would be happier if I could fix it. So this is what we have to work on. This is the job of the fourth ashram. What do I still long for? What do I regret? When my friend Paula was dying, she died consciously. Swami said, no one can die like that unless they're free. And she didn't have an impressive role in the world or even an impressive way of being. But she was free. And she had 3 days. We called it Paula's passing party. We all knew she was dying. And and there was like 10, 20 of us. They let us take over this like sort of wing of the hospital. We were sleeping on the floor and in the empty rooms. And at one point, the nurse came in to me and said, she had cancer all through her. The nurse expressed concern because Paula hadn't urinated in a long time. And so I went to Paula and I said, Paula, they're concerned that you haven't peed. And she said, I hope to die before I pee again. I said, Paula, it's that painful. Oh, yes, she said. You know, she was on morphine, but she was like that. I had been out of town when she went into the hospital, and I came back from a vacation, and I needed to know where to go. Do I go to the city where she's in the hospital? Do I go back to my home? I called the hospital room. Her brother actually answered the phone. And he says, oh, Asha, Paula's dying to see you. And then I hear all this laughter in the room. No, Paula's not dying to see you. Like that. But that was the spirit of what she did. But what she did for those last days, she either asked people to come see her or she made phone calls to every single unresolved issue in her life. She just went systematically through it. And there was this one woman, a great devotee who was a friend of ours, but had a really bad period in her life. And during that period of life, she'd been working for Paula, and Paula had fired her because she was just impossible. And there was just no way. And the woman was so impossible that she never believed that she should have been fired. And so she became very estranged from Paula. And Paula was never able to bridge the gap. So Paula calls her up on the phone. And this was what was so powerful. Paula never changed the truth, but she formulated in such a way that you could build a bridge. So she says to this woman, she didn't say, I'm sorry. She said, I always felt badly about what happened between us. Perfect truth, but what a wonderful way to get across. No blame, no false apology. And then in her way she said, I think we're both big enough gals to put it behind us. What do you think? You know, and so of course the lady said, sure. And in the end, finally she was done. And we said, is there anything else? And she said, this man named PJ, who'd been a friend of hers, but he had already died some years earlier. She said, well, PJ gave me a rose bush once, and I was so mad at him I didn't plant it for a whole month. And I said, Lord, when I die, let that be the only thing I regret, that I didn't plant PJ's rose bush like that. But you just have to ask yourself, you know, first of all, if you could have done better, you would have done better. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. And it was also the karma of whoever got the consequences of your action. You're not powerful enough to have created that karma. It was that karma that pulled it out of you. So it's very egoic, in a very real sense, to carry too much regret. It says, I'm the only force in the universe. Everything depends on me. No, we're all part of this tapestry, and there needed to be a black blot, and I had a can of black paint, so I painted it there. But I didn't cause it. And once it's gone, it's gone. And you don't want to die with a negative cloud over your own consciousness. You just want to die with, well, this has been a great run, Lord, here we go. You know, what's coming next? And that's the single most important thing. There is nothing you have done that you can't just surrender to the divine. Why not?